So we are going to be talking about the family as a client. This is Dr. Daniels, and this is in Chapter 2 of your WOM book, the 10th edition. You're also going to see some supplemental readings in the course under resources, so I would peruse those as well. The reason we talk about a family is because family is the one constant in a child's life. And when a family is thriving and doing well and successful, then the child thrives and does well and is successful. So we're going to talk about how the family can impact child growth and development. The major goal of pediatric nursing is to improve quality of health care for all children. So when we talk about health promotion for a child, a lot of times we're talking about prevention. So making sure that we know the stage that's coming up so that we can prevent any injuries due to just lack of knowledge. So when we're talking about that, those essential components, that's all anticipatory guidance. So with anticipatory guidance, we are focused on making sure that we prevent any injuries, like I said, that we look at nutrition, because nutrition is one of the biggest impacts of growth and development. That we look at immunizations, that we look at dental care, that we look at other things too that might influence. But those are the big ones. So that anticipatory guidance is knowing those developmental stages of a child, knowing what's coming up for the child, and what skills they might master soon or what tasks that they're going to develop soon, so that a parent can prep themselves, prep their homes, prep others around them to make sure that the environment in which the child is growing up is safe. So here's your unit objectives. You guys can look over those. And how do we define family? So it's on page 15 of your 10th edition, and we define family as an institution where individuals related through biology or enduring commitments and representing similar or different generations and genders, participating in roles involving mutual socialization, nurturance, and emotional commitment. That is a big, long definition. Basically, family is defined like pain is defined, whatever the family says it is. So we have to be careful when talking about a family because we have many different types of families. We can have consanguous relationships, which are blood relationships. We can have affinal relationships, which are relationships by marriage. We can have family of origin, the family unit that you're born into. There's lots of different ways you can define family. And basically, for individuals, it's how they define their family. So, in reality, no one can completely agree. So, whatever the individual considers it to be. So this is how we describe families. So if we were to describe family by biology, family is the way we fulfill biological functions, basically how we populate the species. If we describe family by psychology, that's when we look at the interpersonal aspects of the family and basically how the family is responsible for personality development. When we describe family by economics, we're looking at the family as a productive unit, providing material needs. And then when we describe it through sociology, we're looking at the family as a social unit that interacts within the larger society. So, just like everything, there are theorists that have different theories regarding everything, and there are family theories. So, over the next few slides, we're going to look at the family systems theory, the family stress theory, and Duval's developmental theory. So, the family systems theory comes from the general systems theory, where basically the family is viewed as a system that continually interacts with its members and the environment. So the big emphasis is on that interaction, that cause and effect. So with that family system theory, it's saying that whenever there is a change in any one part of the family system, it affects all the other parts of the family system. Now, this effect can be, a small effect or a large effect. And if it's okay to have an effect on the system that kind of ripples through, but we don't want it to be too little or too much. And every part of that system has a role. So we can either be the part of the system that initiates the interaction or the change, or we can be the part of the system that reacts to it. So for example, if the system tends to be a mom, a dad, and a daughter, and the daughter brings in a new boyfriend that the family doesn't like, then that's going to affect not just the daughter, because she's the one initiating the change, and that might be positive or negative for her, but it also then the family, the parents have to react to that change. So it affects the entire system. So when the nurse is looking at this, the nurse is going to focus on the interactions of the family members within themselves and within the larger environment. And it provides a lot of good opportunities for anticipatory guidance to help the family prepare and cope with changes. So we know that, if we know the family is fighting or, at risk for divorce, then okay, how is this going to affect not just you guys but the kids? Or all right, your child is getting to that stage where they might be dating, so when they bring someone home, how will that affect the family? The next theory is the family stress theory, and this basically explains how families react to stressful encounters. And this can be both predictable and unpredictable. So things that are predictable and they can be, like when I say predictable and unpredictable, they can also be good and bad. So a predictable good thing would be having a baby come into the house. We know it's coming, it's a happy situation, but it's still a stress onto the family. Things that are unpredictable, like, a sudden illness or unemployment, those are also unpredictable negative stressors on the family. And so a family can function well with some stress. Everybody functions well with some stress, and it's important to have some stress so that we learn how to deal with it. But when a family experiences too many stressors for it to cope, then a crisis occurs. So we really need to, the nurse, when I say we, the nurse really needs to educate the family on crisis intervention strategies so that it helps family members cope with challenging events so that they can adapt well and, have that change in their family structure or have that change in their interaction, and that stress doesn't kind of derail the entire family. Duval's developmental theory, this basically derives from Erikson's psychosocial theory. There are 8 stages or 8 developmental tasks of the family throughout the lifespan. Page 17, box 2-1 describes these. And basically, in each stage, the family faces those new developmental tasks. And so the nurse can provide anticipatory guidance so it can prepare members for transition to the next family stage. So, stage 1, a marriage happens or joining of families happen. And then the family has an infant and then a preschool and then a school age and a teenager. And then that teenager then is, going out and launching their own family and starting their own little, their beginning, and then the parents become middle-aged, and then the aged family. So where, we shift to retirement. So it goes through those stages, and because we kind of know what's coming, again, we provide that anticipatory guidance. So basically, the reason we want to know about these different systems, family stress, Duval's, is because our nursing interventions are dependent on the theoretical family model that's being used. So as we're doing our family assessment, we can have these tools in our pocket and then apply the appropriate theorist or theory. So this is the family structure. This just it's on page 18 of the 10th edition, and it just, defines families. So a nuclear family is 2 parents and children. Now, these 2 parents and children can be biological, stepped, adopted, foster, but it's 2 parents and children. Binuclear is parents continuing the parenting role while terminating the marriage. So basically when a divorce or separation happens. So you still have 2 parents, but a divorce has occurred. Blended or reconstituted is when a step parent becomes involved. And you can see where some of these, there's some gray area, because a nuclear family with a mom and a stepdad and a child, that's a nuclear blended family. So there is some gray area and some overlap with them. Extended is when there's at least 1 parent and child plus another family member that is not a parent or a child. And that's usually a grandparent. So for example, I have an extended family within my home because I have myself, my husband, my 2 children, and my father living with us. Single parents is 1 parent in a house with the kids, and that could, again, be overlapped with a binuclear family. We don't really see polygamy. It is illegal in 1 state, I believe, but we don't really see it here in Florida, but that's where there's the addition of wives or husbands, so there's more than 1 wife or more than 1 husband. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, it's basically a legal or a common law tie between 2 persons of the same sex who have children. You have a traditional nuclear, which would basically be 2 parents with their biological children. So nuclear can have a foster parent or a step parent, but a traditional nuclear is that 2 parents with biological children. And communal is where basically they have a common ownership of property and there's a strong reliance of the group members. But it's several families. So several family members, and they basically share something. They share homemaking or they share child rearing functions, and they all live on 1 property. The purpose of the family, or the family's function, is to, 1, reproduce. We're to protect. It's about survival. We support, and that support is both economical and emotional. It provides recreation. It has religious influences. It helps buffer stress. It helps instill values like cultural values. Also things like education, appearance, morals. It helps teaches health and maybe alternative methods. It socialize. It basically helps with the society expectation, what the roles are of mom and dad, ways to interact with the larger society. It helps interpret societal changes. So how roles change as, you know, as society changes. And basically, knowledge of these characteristics of the family help the nurse predict ways in which families may cope, because how well they interact determines how well the family functions. So if the family is not functioning well or interacting well, they may not function well. Factors that influence family function is roles and expectations, communication patterns, values and beliefs, and control, power, demanding behaviors. So family roles, relationships, strengths, basically these things may influence the family, right? So family size and configuration. So you can have a small family and there's a lot of emphasis on individual development. Small families tend to be more democratic. And then you can have large families where there's more emphasis on the development of the group and not so much on the individual. But they learn to cooperate well, because cooperation is essential when there's a ton of kids. There's limited space, limited resources. And they do well adjusting to changes in crisis, because with a large family, there's just more chances of having changes in crisis. There tends to be a dominant family member in a large family, like an older sibling or a parent. There tends not to be as many intimate relationships, but especially between the parent and child, because there are so many of them. But the siblings tend to be very dependent. Sibling interactions, these are important because these are the longest relationships people will share. So it's hard when there's a new arrival, especially for toddlers and preschoolers, because that age difference of 2 to 3 tends to be the hardest one for adjustment. So obviously the more siblings there are, the more interaction they will have. The closer in age they are to each other, the more influence they have on each other, and they may compare themselves to their siblings. It could be things like ordinal position, birth order. There's lots of studies, and there's, sometimes there's variations, but there's a lot of truth to the older child versus a middle child versus a younger child. Multiple births, when we have twins or triplets, how does that affect? Parenting, adjustments, parenting styles can be different. So there can be like an authoritarian. So these are a little confusing. So authoritarian is someone who controls and mandates things. And they, when they say, go clean up your room, it's because I said so. Where a permissive parenting, that's when the child regulates things. Go clean up your room. And the child says, no, I don't want to. Oh, okay, you don't have to. So that's permissive. Those are extremes. You don't want authoritarian or permissive. You want more of authoritative. And this is where the parent is firm and consistent. But there's an emphasis behind why the child is doing it so that they can learn. It's not just telling someone to do something, but why we're doing it. So it's important for you to clean your room so that we don't get, so that we know what we have, or don't eat in your room because we don't want bugs to come in there. So it's important for the child to know why they're doing it. But when the child says, no, I don't want to, the parent needs to be firm and do it. Support systems are important. And then, we need to, in general, families need to set limits and discipline. So, all of these, each family will have its own set of traditions and expectations, and conflicts arise when members don't meet these expectations. So, looking at things like the family size, the sibling interactions, the parenting style will help again guide the nurse. So, factors affecting the transition to parenthood. We used to say that, most people were parents between the ages of 18 and 35, but that is changing drastically. We have people that are, going into parenthood for the first time much older, well into their 40s. Fathers' involvement. Fathers are becoming way more involved, so that's changing relationships and families. Parenting education. Obviously, the more education a parent has, the better, but I can tell you that nothing prepares you for parenthood. Support systems. What are their support systems? Do they have ways to cope? Do they have family around them to help out when things go wrong? So on page 19, box 2-3, it has quantities of a strong family. So what are some characteristics that would make a family more at risk? Well, if they're of poverty, lack of a family structure, lack of parenting resources, increased isolation from neighbors, living in neighborhoods with drug, violence, decreased services. All of these would make a family very at risk. And unfortunately, we're seeing families are our fastest growing homeless population. So that really affects them. But what makes a family strong? When they're committed, when there's appreciation, when there's encouragement, when there's time, when there's purpose, where there's values, beliefs, problem solving, positive attitudes, flexibility. And these seem like kind of a no duh, but as we look at a family and if we notice that they have these things that put them at risk, we need to find them resources and help them so that they can develop more qualities to be a stronger family. We kind of already talked about parenting styles, a little bit about discipline, but basically we do need to set limits and discipline. We want to minimize misbehavior and really reinforce good behavior. As hard as it is, you really want to ignore bad behavior. And trust me, that's almost impossible when you have like a 2-year-old screaming in your face, but it's really important. We can reason with them if they're old enough to see another's point of view, but that, often takes well into the school age child. We can work on behavior modification. There can be consequences, timeouts, but typically timeouts are based on the age of the child and shouldn't really last longer than if the child's 2 years, then 2 minutes, or 3 years, 3 minutes. If they sit in timeout for too long, they've kind of forgotten why they're in timeout, so it doesn't work as well. We don't believe in corporal punishment. Any kind of physical punishment, whether it is spanking or anything that causes physical pain. Parents can say, okay, you can do, 40 push-ups or run laps. That's not, a good way to deal with bad behavior. And as silly as it may sound, children want and need limits. They want to know what is expected. And when the rules are clear and consistently applied, they do well. So when rules are intermittently applied, that's when bad behavior prolongs itself. So being consistent, being persistent, being very clear is actually in the child's benefit. There are different things that, special parenting situations. We have to think about adoption. So does the child know they're adopted? When is the best time to tell them? Who's responsible for telling them? When divorce happens, the impact on the child. How do we tell the child? Single parenting, reconstituting, when we bring someone in. When do we introduce them? Foster parenting. So there's lots of different things that, things will come up, special situations. And, how do we approach it? How do we focus? How much do we involve the child? How much do we tell them? All those things we have to keep in mind. Children divorce. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of divorce. And we really need to understand the effects of divorce on children, especially it affects different children from different age groups. So whether they're an infant, a preschooler, or a toddler. The big thing is you have to reassure the child that they did not cause it. And, they get worried. Well, if my parents stopped loving each other, could they stop loving me? Or how will this change my routine? Finances change. The way of living may change. They may go live with grandparents. They might have, their own room at mommy's house, but share a room at daddy's house. And what if I forget my favorite, toy at one house? Now I don't get to go to I don't get to go home anymore because I have to go to aftercare because mommy has to work now. So it really causes a ripple effect and a big change for the parent. And we just said that children do well with set expectations. So that change really disrupts them. Other family trends we're seeing, families are smaller. We don't tend to have these big families. Moms are working outside the home. Very health conscious. I think everybody's on gluten-free, dairy-free, some kind of diet. Lots of organic foods. We're seeing lots of multicultural families. We're very mobile now. You used to grow up in one house your whole life. And now people move across the country for jobs, to be closer to other family. And unfortunately, with all this, child abuse is increasing. So really, again, knowing the families that are at risk is going to be important because it's at-risk families who are more likely to experience child abuse. There are social, cultural, religious influences on children. So always ask the family about their cultural preferences. Don't assume that if they are of a certain ethnic group that they practice a specific tradition. Just be open. Say, tell me about what you practice. Especially when they're in the hospital, things are different. Communication. There's lots of different types of communication. This is going to be chapter 4 in your WAN 10th edition. Verbal communication is obviously spoken language. And then there's nonverbal communication, body language, facial expression, posture. Children like to communicate through abstract, through play and symbols. But listening really is the most important part of therapeutic communication. We need to listen to what they're saying, concentrate on their verbal and nonverbal, avoid making any judgments, be open-minded, consider their cultural view in relation to how they're communicating, really allowing for privacy as much as possible. So even with kids, we can't just assume that we don't have to be private because they're a kid. We really need to just kind of be silent and let them voice their concerns and be heard. So those are the things that are going to be most therapeutic and allow you to really get to know the family and get to know how they're interacting and working so that you can best guide and help them. Lastly, the roles of the grandparents. We are seeing a lot of grandparents raising their grandkids. And that's because of a lot of different things. Substance abuse is on the rise. There's a lot of teen parents, parents that are incarcerated, parents with emotional problems that can't parent. And so because of this, again, it's another effect on the family. An effect on the grandparents. They may not have to work. Their finances were all set to take care of themselves, but not to take on a child. So maybe they have to go back to work, or their finances won't be as well. It causes increased stress for them, increased anxiety. If you've ever talked to a grandparent trying to learn today's technology, it's hard for them, and they have not as many resources to help them. And their health isn't as good. They're not meant to raise children. So these are all things to think about when we're talking about family. And again, the big key point is that family is whatever the individual considers it to be. And that we have these theories that can help us apply to pediatric nursing and help those families. And we really need to understand all these different things about families, including like how we discipline, what the effect of divorce is, cultural impacts, what things make them at risk or a strong family, what are some of the roles and relationships the family has, how is the family functioning, what is the structure of the family. All of these are going to help guide us, make sure that we can make the family successful so that we can make the child successful. Thanks so much. Have a great day.